All right, in this lecture, we want to populate this category drop-down list. We want to get the list of categories from our database. Now here we have two options. One option is to go directly in the database and add a node here called categories populated, and then simply read it to populate this drop-down list. Another approach is to build another page for the admin to manage the list of categories. Which approach do you think is better? Well, as I said before, it depends. Software engineering is all about trade-offs. In this particular case, I believe the list of categories in an organic shop is pretty stable. For example, we have the bread section, the dairy section, fruits, vegetables, and so on. These sections or these categories are pretty stable. They don't change that often. It's not like every day we get a new category or we want to rename a category or delete an existing one. So I would rather to focus on delivering this application with the functionality that is absolutely essential in the first version. So at a minimum, we need this product form to manage the list of products in our shop. So for this version, I would rather to come here in the database and populate the categories by hand. This way, we can release the first working version and give it to our client much faster. We can make the business happier. In the future, we can always come back to this application and create a new page for the admin to manage the list of categories. So this is something I want you to take away from this lecture. Your focus should always be on delivering value. For every step, for every line of code you're writing, you should think about the priorities. Is this something that is absolutely essential to deliver over the next 2 weeks, or can it be delayed to sometime in the future? All right, with that introduction, now I'm going to go ahead and populate the list of categories. For each category, we want an identifier and a name. But I'm not going to use a numeric value for the ID because I want to make the URLs in our application search engine friendly. So instead of having, let's say, localhost/categories/1, I want to have categories/bread or vegetables. So I want to make this name the unique identifier for each category. But each category should also have a readable name that we display in the application. So here, I'm going to add a top-level node called categories. Inside this, I'm going to add another node. Here, I'm going to use that unique identifier for the category. So let's call this bread. So this is our category node. Now, under this, I'm going to have a name property, and this is what we display to the user. So capital B, bread. Let's take a look. So this is the structure of our categories. Now in the future, we can have other properties under each category. For example, we can have a new property called is featured. Perhaps we want to make a few special categories, featured categories on our homepage. For now, we only have the name property. Now similarly, I'm going to add another category, fruits. Under this, we're going to have name, and we set it to fruits with a capital F. Now I'm going to pause the video and add a few more categories here. All right, so here's the end result. We've got bread, dairy, fruits, seasonings, and vegetables. Now look at these seasonings. The key or the ID for this category is seasonings, but the name we display is seasonings and spices. So 3 words separated by a space. We don't want to use this as an identifier in our URL, okay? That's why we used this name as the unique identifier for the category. Okay, now that we have these categories in our database, next we're going to read them and populate our categories drop-down list. So as I told you before, anytime we want to work with the backend, we should use a service. So I'm going to generate a service for reading the categories node from our Firebase database. So ng-gs category. We have the category service. Let's go to app.module and register this as a provider. So in the providers array, I'm going to add category service. Also, note that in terms of naming convention, I'm using singular name here. So I've got user service, category service. All these names are following the same convention. All right, let's go to category service. Here, first we need to inject Angular Fire database object. So private db of type Angular Fire database. Then we add a method called getCategories. And all we do here is return this.db.list, and the path is /categories. Simple as that. Now let's go to our product form component. So product form.ts. Here I'm going to inject our new category service. So category service of type category service. And I didn't add the private modifier here because for now we are only going to use this in the constructor and not anywhere else in the class. So I'm going to define a field here, categories, $, to indicate that this is an observable. And here in the constructor, we'll simply initialize this field by setting this.categories to category service dot get categories. Now we have an observable. We can go to our template and unwrap it using the async pipe. So let's go to our form. All right, so here's our category dropdown list. We have a blank option. After that, I'm going to add another option. And here I'm going to use the ng4 directive to repeat this. Let C of categories $, and we apply the async pipe, and then use the property binding syntax to bind the value to C.$key. So remember, every object in Firebase has this property $key, which is the unique identifier for that object. In this case, that $key is this value here, okay? So this is our value, and for the name, we're going to display c.name. Now let's test the application back in the browser. So here's our form, and you can see our category dropdown list is perfectly populated. But these items are not sorted alphabetically. To fix this, we need to go back to our category service. So here in getCategories method, where we are reading the categories, I'm going to pass a second argument to the list method. This object should have a property called query, which we set to another object. And in this object, we can determine how we want to sort these categories. So here we have a few options. One of them is order by child, and we set this to name. What this means is that we want Firebase to order our categories by this child property. So every category has a child that is called name. Now we can also order categories by their ID or their key, or by their value if they were not complex objects. You can find the list of all these properties in Angular Fire documentation. So if you go to their GitHub page, you can see various properties that we can set in this query object. So now let's see the effect of adding this order by child property here. So back in our form, we can see all our items are sorted alphabetically. Beautiful. Next, we're going to take this form to the next level and save this product to our database.